A powerful rancher cracked his whip to humiliate a black cowgirl in front of everyone, but he had no idea she was a former jiu-jitsu world champion, and his cruelty was about to cost him everything. The crack of the whip echoed across the dusty corral. Evan Monroe smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. "Pick up the pace, Rose. My cattle don't have all day." He snapped the leather again, this time closer, kicking up dirt near her boots. The other ranch hands fell silent, their eyes fixed on the ground. But Rose didn't flinch. She simply stopped, turned slowly, and met his gaze. The silence that followed was heavier than the Texas heat. If you believe that no one should be humiliated for doing their job, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories, and comment with your city and the word justice. Your support helps bring these stories to light. This was West Texas, a land where the sun showed no mercy and power was measured in acres and cattle. The Monroe Cattle Company was the biggest operation for 100 miles, and Evan Monroe, the owner's son, acted like he was king. He had inherited the land, but none of his father's quiet respect. To Evan, the workers were just tools, and Rose was a tool he couldn't seem to control. Rose Jackson had arrived 2 years ago, a quiet woman with a past she never spoke of. She didn't talk much, but her work spoke for itself. She could calm the most stubborn bull and ride the wildest bronco. The older hands respected her skill, a fact that seemed to irritate Evan endlessly. He saw her competence not as an asset, but as a challenge to his authority. The problem wasn't her work, it was her presence. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that Evan couldn't break. He tried to undermine her with snide comments and impossible tasks, but she met every challenge with stoic determination. Today, with a group of potential buyers visiting the ranch, Evan decided he needed to make a public statement. He needed to put her in her place, to show everyone, including the visitors, who was in charge. The whip wasn't for the cattle, it was for her. He wanted to see her cower. He wanted to see fear in her eyes. He wanted to break her. "Did you hear me?" Evan's voice was low and menacing. He took a step forward, the whip held loosely in his hand. "You work for me. You move when I say move." Rose remained still. Her eyes, calm and unreadable, stayed locked on his. She wasn't looking at the whip. She was looking at him, studying his posture, his balance, the way he shifted his weight. To Evan, it was a look of defiance. To her, it was a calculation. She had left the world of competitive jiu-jitsu behind, trading the mats of a Rio de Janeiro gym for the open plains of Texas, hoping to find peace. But she learned long ago that bullies are the same everywhere, whether they wear a business suit or cowboy boots. This single moment of humiliation was a tipping point. Rose's decision to stand her ground would do more than just settle a score in the corral. It would set off a chain reaction, revealing a dark secret of violence and exploitation that festered just beneath the surface of the Monroe Cattle Company. Her fight for dignity would soon become a fight for justice for an entire community that was too afraid to speak. The rancher had chosen his target poorly, aiming his whip at a woman who knew exactly how to use an opponent's aggression against them. He thought a flick of his wrist could break her spirit, but he was about to learn what happens when you corner someone who has nothing left to lose. What does a person do when their last sanctuary is threatened? Evan's patience snapped. The sight of her calm defiance in front of his potential partners was a public insult. He took another step, raising the whip slightly, not for a full crack, but as a direct threat. "I won't tell you again." That was his mistake. He shifted his weight forward, committing to the threat. For Rose, it was an invitation. In the split second Evan's arm moved, she exploded into motion. It wasn't a wild swing or a desperate lunge. It was a precise, economical movement that seemed to bend the air around her. She closed the 10 feet between them in 3 quick steps, getting inside the whip's effective range. Before Evan could even register what was happening, her left hand shot out and clamped down on his right wrist, the one holding the whip. Her right hand grabbed the fabric of his shirt near his collar. She didn't pull him. She didn't push him. She used his own forward momentum, his own aggression, and simply turned her hips. Evan, a man who weighed a good 50 pounds more than her, was suddenly airborne for a fraction of a second. He landed hard on his back, the wind knocked out of him in a sharp gasp. The whip clattered onto the dirt beside him. The entire corral was frozen in disbelief. The ranch hands stared, mouths agape. The buyers in their clean, pressed shirts looked completely stunned. Rose didn't stop there. She followed him to the ground, her knee pressing into his chest to pin him down. She had his right arm isolated, bent at an unnatural angle. It was a classic armbar. She wasn't applying full pressure, just enough for him to understand the terrifying fragility of his own body. He was completely helpless. "You drop the attitude," Rose said, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the violence of the moment. "You don't get to treat people this way." Evan's face was a mask of shock and fury. Humiliation burned in his eyes. He struggled, but it was useless. He was pinned like an insect. "Get off me!" he choked out, his voice hoarse. "Rose!" The voice was calm but firm. It was Silas, the old ranch foreman, a man who had worked for Evan's father for 40 years. He stepped forward slowly, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "That's enough. Let him go." Rose held Evan's gaze for another second, making sure her point was made. Then, with the same fluid control, she released his arm and stood up, backing away slowly. She was calm, her breathing even. Evan scrambled to his feet, his face red with shame and rage. He snatched the whip from the ground. "You're fired!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get your things and get off my property, now!" Rose just nodded once, turned her back on him and started walking toward the small bunkhouse she called home. She didn't look back. The lead buyer, a man named Mr. Harrison, adjusted his tie. He looked from the enraged Evan to the silent, departing figure of Rose. He then turned to the other two investors and shared a look. The tour was over. "Mr. Monroe," Harrison said, his tone now cold and professional. "Thank you for your time. I think we've seen enough." "What?" "No, this was just a disagreement with an employee," Evan stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. "She's been dealt with." "We see that," Harrison replied dryly. "Our firm values stability and professional management. What we just witnessed was neither. We will be withdrawing our offer. Good day." The buyers turned and walked back to their pristine SUV without another word, leaving Evan standing alone in the middle of the corral. The silence was deafening. The multi-million-dollar expansion deal, the deal he was supposed to secure to prove his worth to his father, had just evaporated in a cloud of dust. He stared at the spot where Rose had stood, his hands clenched into fists. This was no longer about ranch discipline. This was about revenge. As Rose packed her single duffel bag in the sparse bunkhouse room, Silas appeared at the doorway. He held out an envelope. "Here, this is your pay plus a little extra. From me." Rose took it. "Thank you, Silas. You be careful now," he said, his voice low. "Evan's pride is a dangerous thing. He won't let this go. The Monroe family practically owns the sheriff in this county. There won't be any safe place for you around here." "I'm not looking for a safe place," Rose said, zipping her bag. "I'm just looking for what's right." Silas nodded, a look of grim understanding on his face. "Sometimes they're the hardest places to find." He hesitated, then added, "If you need to know anything about how things really work around here, find me at the Dusty Spur Saloon on a Saturday night. Just be careful who you talk to." Rose met his eyes, seeing a flicker of something more than just concern. It was a hint of an alliance, a crack in the wall of fear that surrounded the Monroe Ranch. She had lost her job and her home, but she had gained something far more valuable, an enemy who had just shown his weakness, and a potential ally who knew where the bodies were buried. Rose walked down the long dirt road leading away from the Monroe Ranch, the Texas sun beating down on her back. She didn't look back. There was nothing there for her anymore. The dust kicked up by her worn boots settled on her jeans. She had the cash from Silas in her pocket and a single bag containing all her worldly possessions. For the first time in 2 years, she was completely adrift. But she didn't feel fear. She felt a cold, hard clarity. The peace she had sought here was an illusion. The fight she had run from had found her again, just wearing a different face. Back at the ranch house, the air was thick with fury. Evan Monroe stormed into his father's opulent study, the smell of leather and old money hanging in the air. His father, a formidable man named Richard Monroe, sat behind a massive oak desk, his face like a thundercloud. He didn't yell. He never yelled. His voice was a low, cutting whisper that was far more terrifying. "You lost the Harrison deal," Richard stated, not as a question, but as a final judgment. A $50 million expansion, gone, because you couldn't control one ranch hand. "She assaulted me, Dad," Evan protested, his voice high-pitched. "In front of them. What was I supposed to do?" "Your job," Richard said, his eyes cold as steel. "You were supposed to handle it. Instead, you made a spectacle of yourself and this family. You showed weakness. Now you will fix this, not the deal. That ship has sailed. You will fix the problem that caused this. I want this woman gone. I don't want to hear her name again. I don't want to see her face in this county. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Evan said, his own anger now replaced by a chilling desire to obey, to prove he could be as ruthless as his father. He left the study and immediately pulled out his phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart. "Sheriff Miller, it's Evan Monroe. I have a situation. A former employee, Rose Jackson, assaulted me and stole several $100s worth of equipment from the bunkhouse. I want you to find her. I'm pressing charges." The sheriff on the other end didn't question it. "Consider it done, Evan. I'll put the word out." Rose reached the small town of Redemption after an hour of walking. It wasn't much more than a single main street lined with weathered storefronts. A general store, a diner, a saloon, and a dusty motel called the Redemption Rest Stop. She knew she needed a place to lie low and think. She walked into the motel office. The clerk, a skinny man with shifty eyes, looked up from his newspaper. "Need a room," Rose said, placing some cash on the counter. The clerk looked at her, then at the cash. He hesitated. "Just one night." "To start," Rose replied. He pushed a registration card and a key across the counter without another word. As Rose walked to her room, she saw him through the window picking up the phone. Her instincts screamed. She had been in Redemption for less than 10 minutes, and she was already being watched. Inside the drab room, she didn't unpack. She stood by the window, peering through the grimy blinds. The town was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, watchful. Silas's words echoed in her mind. The Monroe family practically owns the sheriff in this county. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't run either. Running would just mean being hunted. Her only option was to fight back. And to do that, she needed information. She needed to know what Evan and his father were hiding. Silas was the key. Saturday was too far away. She had to find him sooner. She decided to head to the Dusty Spur Saloon. It was only late afternoon, but maybe someone there knew where to find him after hours. As she stepped back onto the main street, a county sheriff's patrol car cruised past, slowing down as it passed her. The deputy in the passenger seat stared at her openly. They didn't stop, but the message was clear. "We see you. We know where you are." Rose ignored them and kept walking, her pace steady. She wasn't a criminal on the run. She was a woman who had been wronged, and she would not act like she was guilty. She reached the swinging doors of the saloon and pushed them open. The place was dim and smelled of stale beer and sawdust. A few old-timers sat at the bar. Before she could even let her eyes adjust to the gloom, a shadow fell over her. 2 large ranch hands from the Monroe Ranch, men she recognized as Evan's most loyal cronies, blocked the doorway. "Evan wants to see you." The first one, a man named Duke, grunted. "I'm not interested," Rose said, turning to face them. "That wasn't a request," the second one sneered, cracking his knuckles. "You're coming with us, one way or another." Rose didn't answer with words. As Duke reached for her arm, she moved with him, not against him. She used his forward momentum to pull him off balance, stepping to the side and dropping her center of gravity. Her right leg hooked behind his knee, while her hand, still on his arm, guided him down. It was a simple foot sweep perfectly executed. Duke, a man who outweighed her by 100 pounds, crashed onto the saloon's dusty floorboards with a loud thud that shook a nearby table. The second man, stunned for a half second, charged forward with a clumsy roar. This was what Rose was waiting for. He was all aggression, no technique. She met his charge, not with force, but with a fluid deflection. She ducked under his wild swing, controlled his arm, and spun behind him, locking her arms around his neck in a rear naked choke. It wasn't a move to kill, just to control. She squeezed, cutting off the blood flow to his brain. His struggles became frantic, then weak. After a few seconds, his eyes rolled back, and he went limp, collapsing into a heap. The entire saloon was dead silent. The old-timers at the bar stared, their drinks forgotten. Duke on the floor was scrambling to get up, his face a mixture of pain and disbelief. "Stay down," Rose said calmly, her voice cutting through the silence. From behind the bar, the bartender, a tough-looking woman in her 50s with tired eyes, slowly reached under the counter. She didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out an old flip phone and started dialing. Duke saw this and panic flashed in his eyes. He looked at Rose, then at his unconscious partner. "You don't understand," he rasped, getting to his knees. "If we go back empty-handed, Evan's gonna kill us. The shipment's tonight. We can't mess this up." Shipment. The word hung in the air, loaded with a meaning that had nothing to do with cattle. Before Rose could press him for more, the distant wail of a siren started to grow louder. The bartender hung up her phone. "Sheriff's on his way," she said, her expression unreadable. "You'd better go." Rose looked at the woman. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I've been pouring drinks in this town for 30 years, the woman replied, her voice low. "I'm tired of watching the Monroes treat people like dirt. Now get out of here, back door. Go." Rose didn't need to be told twice. She gave Duke one last warning look and slipped behind the bar. The bartender pointed to a door marked "Staff Only." "It leads to the alley. Good luck." Rose was out the door and into the sweltering heat of the alley just as the sheriff's car screeched to a halt out front. She didn't run. She walked quickly, keeping to the shadows, moving away from the main street. She could hear the heavy footsteps of Sheriff Miller entering the saloon, his voice booming with false authority. She was now a fugitive. Evan had called the sheriff on a bogus theft charge, and now she had just assaulted 2 of his men. They wouldn't stop hunting her. The word shipment replayed in her mind. It sounded illegal. It sounded like the kind of secret that a powerful family would do anything to protect. It sounded like leverage. She needed to find Silas, and she needed to find him now. The saloon was no longer an option. She remembered him mentioning he lived a quiet life, away from the ranch. Most of the long-term hands had small cabins or trailers a few miles out of town. But where? As she circled around the block, sticking to the dusty back streets, she saw the bartender from the saloon stepping out into the alley for a smoke. The woman saw Rose hiding behind a dumpster and beckoned her over. "They're looking for you," the woman said, taking a long drag from her cigarette. "Miller's got his deputy searching every building on Main Street. My name's Maria, by the way." "Rose, thanks for the help back there." "Don't thank me yet," Maria said, blowing a stream of smoke. "You're looking for Silas, aren't you? He's the only one with a spine left around here." Rose nodded. "He lives out on the old county road, about 5 miles east. It's a small, run-down cabin by a dry creek bed. You can't miss it, but you need to be careful. Miller will be checking on people known to be friendly with you." Maria flicked her cigarette away. "Silas has been wanting someone to stand up to the Monroes for years. He just never thought it would be someone like you." "What did he want someone to stand up about?" Rose asked, her senses sharp. Maria's face hardened. "Things go missing in this county, Rose, not just equipment. People, migrant workers who come for a season and are never seen again. Everyone knows they end up at the Monroe Ranch, but no one can prove anything. They say the Monroes work them to death or worse, and Silas, he's been keeping a record of the names. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about a rich man's pride. It was about something far darker. The shipment Duke mentioned probably wasn't drugs or guns. It was human beings. Her fight for dignity had just stumbled into a war for people's lives. Undefined. The weight of Maria's words settled on Rose like a physical burden. This was no longer about a whip or a lost job. It was about lives being stolen in the dead of night. She had to get to Silas. 5 miles on foot in the dark, with the sheriff hunting her, was suicide. She needed a vehicle. Peering from the alley, she scanned the back streets. Parked near a dilapidated workshop was an old, rusted-out pickup truck, the kind that had seen better decades. It was a long shot, but desperation was a powerful motivator. She moved silently, checking the cab. The door was unlocked. Better yet, the ignition had been crudely wired by its owner. 2 frayed wires hung beneath the steering column. It was a skill she'd learned out of necessity long ago. A few seconds of fumbling, a spark, and the old engine coughed to life with a protesting roar. She didn't waste a moment, pulling out onto the road and heading east, keeping her speed steady and her eyes scanning for headlights in her rearview mirror. The 5 miles felt like 100. Every shadow on the side of the road looked like a patrol car. The old truck rattled and shook, a noisy beacon in the quiet night. Finally, she saw it. A small, unlit cabin set back from the road, just as Maria had described. But something was wrong. Parked in front of it, gleaming under the moonlight, was a brand new, expensive-looking truck. Evan Monroe's truck. Rose killed the engine and the lights, coasting the last 100 feet in silence. She got out, leaving her bag behind, and crept toward the cabin through the tall, dry grass. The windows were dark, but she could hear voices from inside. One was the low, steady rumble of Silas. The other was the sharp, panicked anger of Evan. "I've given my whole life to your family, Evan," Silas was saying, his voice strained. "But I will not be a part of this. Not this." "You're already a part of it, you old fool," Evan's voice shot back. "You think you can just watch and judge? I know you've been writing things down. Where is it? Where's the book?" Rose moved to the side of the cabin, pressing her ear against the thin wooden wall. She heard a thud, like a table being overturned, followed by a grunt of pain from Silas. "Give me the book, old man, or I swear I'll do more than just cost you your pension," Evan threatened. That was enough. Rose didn't have time for a plan. She circled to the back of the cabin, found the flimsy back door, and kicked it open with a single powerful stomp. The lock splintered, and the door flew inward. Evan spun around, his face a mask of shock and rage. One of his men, not Duke or the other one from the saloon, but a harder, colder-looking man, was standing over Silas, who was on the floor, clutching his side. The room was in shambles. "You!" Evan spat, his shock turning to a venomous smile. "You just made this so much easier. Now I can claim self-defense." He nodded to his man. "Get her." The hired muscle moved toward her, pulling a large knife from his belt. Rose didn't wait for him to close the distance. She picked up a wooden chair and hurled it at him. He deflected it easily, but it bought her a second. She lunged forward, not at him, but at Evan. If she could take him hostage, she could end this. But the henchman was fast. He intercepted her, grabbing her arm. Rose twisted, dropping her weight and pulling him forward, aiming for another throw. But this man was different from the saloon brawlers. He knew how to fight. He kept his base wide, resisting her leverage. As they struggled, a deafening bang echoed through the small cabin. Rose froze. So did the henchman. Both of them looked over at Evan. He was holding a small silver pistol, a wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. On the floor, Silas lay completely still, a dark stain spreading across his chest. "You idiot!" the henchman yelled at Evan. "The boss said no bodies." "He wouldn't give me the book," Evan said, his voice trembling, trying to justify the irreversible act. He looked at Rose, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. It's her fault. She made me do it. The moment was broken. The henchman released Rose, turning to his boss. We have to go. Now, the shipment is in an hour. They backed out of the cabin, Evan still pointing the gun at Rose, his hand shaking. They scrambled into their truck and sped away, leaving Rose alone in the sudden, terrible silence with the man who had tried to help her. She rushed to Silas's side, but she knew it was too late. His eyes were open, but the life was fading from them. He coughed, a trickle of blood at his lips. "The book," he wheezed, his hand weakly gesturing toward the stone fireplace. Loose stone, third from the left. Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Silas, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry," he whispered, his voice a bare thread of sound. "Be angry. Stop them. The old loading dock by the river. Tonight." His hand fell limp. The last breath left his body. The old foreman was gone. A wave of cold rage washed over Rose, extinguishing her grief. She stood up and walked to the fireplace. She found the loose stone and pulled it out. Tucked inside the dark cavity was a small, leather-bound notebook. She opened it. Inside were dates, names, and numbers, a meticulous record of the people the Monroes had disappeared. This was the proof. This was Silas's life's work, and now it was her weapon. Rose stood in the silent cabin, the weight of the leather-bound book in her hand feeling heavier than stone. Silas's body lay on the floor, a testament to the Monroes' cruelty. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was a fire that had to be forged into a weapon. She knelt and gently closed the old foreman's eyes. "I'll make it right, Silas," she whispered to the empty room. "I promise." She knew they would be back. Or worse, Sheriff Miller would arrive, find her here, and the story would write itself. Disgruntled employee murders her old boss. The gun Evan used would be found with her prints on it. She had to move. She tucked the book securely inside her jacket, took one last look at the man who had tried to do the right thing, and slipped back out into the night. The stolen truck was her only way out. She started the engine and drove, not aimlessly, but with a singular burning purpose. She drove back towards town. Meanwhile, Evan Monroe's truck tore down the dirt road, the tires spitting gravel. The henchman, whose name was Cole, was driving. Evan was in the passenger seat, staring blankly ahead, the pistol still clutched in his trembling hand. "You're a fool, Evan," Cole said, his voice a low growl. "Richard is going to have your hide for this. He said to scare the old man, not kill him. He wouldn't give me the book, and she was there." Evan's voice was a panicked squeak. "She saw everything. She saw me. What were we supposed to do?" "What I'm supposed to do is handle the shipment," Cole snapped. "What you're supposed to do is not screw it up. Now we have a body and a witness who has the one thing that can bring all of this down. Richard will handle it. He always does." Rose didn't drive into the center of town. She parked the truck in a dark alley, several blocks away from the dusty Spur Saloon, and approached on foot. The streets were empty now, the only light coming from the saloon's neon sign. Through the window, she could see Maria wiping down the bar, getting ready to close. Rose tapped on the glass of the back door. Maria jumped, her hand instinctively going for the old baseball bat she kept under the counter. She peered through the grimy window, her eyes widening when she recognized Rose. She quickly unlocked the door and pulled her inside. "Are you insane?" Maria hissed, locking the door behind them. "The sheriff and his deputy have been driving around town looking for you for the last hour. They're going to be looking for me for murder soon," Rose said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. Maria stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "Evan Monroe. He was at Silas's cabin. He was looking for something. I tried to stop him." Rose paused, the words catching in her throat. "He killed him, Maria. He shot Silas and left him on the floor." The color drained from Maria's face. She leaned back against the bar, her tough exterior crumbling for a moment. She had known Silas for 30 years. "That old man," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "He was trying to protect this," Rose said, pulling the leather book from her jacket and placing it on the bar. "Silas kept a record of everything." All the names of the workers who disappeared, the dates they arrived, the dates they went missing, it's all here. Maria opened the book, her fingers tracing the neat, handwritten lines, page after page of names. "I knew it," she said, her voice thick with anger. "We all knew it, but we were too scared to say anything." She looked up at Rose, her eyes hardening with a new resolve. What did Evan want with this? He was panicking. "One of his men mentioned a shipment tonight," Rose explained. "Silas's last words were, 'the old loading dock by the river.'" The pieces fit together with sickening clarity. "That's where they bring them in," Maria said. "It's an abandoned fish processing plant. They use it to bring in undocumented workers, promise them jobs, and then they just disappear into the Monroe machine. They work them until they drop and nobody ever knows." At the Monroe mansion, Richard Monroe stood by the fireplace in his study, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. He listened without expression as Evan frantically explained what happened. Cole stood silently by the door. When Evan finished, Richard didn't move for a full minute. "So," he finally said, his voice dangerously calm, "in one evening, you lost a multi-million-dollar deal, murdered my most loyal employee, and handed the evidence of our entire operation to the one person who has a reason to use it against us. Is that an accurate summary?" "Dad, Evan stammered. Richard slammed the glass down on the mantelpiece, the whiskey sloshing over the side. "Do not call me Dad. You are not a son, you are a liability." He turned to face him, his eyes burning with cold fire. "You have jeopardized 40 years of work because you couldn't handle your own petty pride." He turned to Cole. "Call Sheriff Miller. Tell him the Jackson woman broke into Silas's cabin, stole his savings, and shot him when he resisted. Tell him she's armed and dangerous. I want every road in and out of this county locked down. I want her found." Cole nodded and stepped out to make the call. Richard looked back at his son. "The shipment will proceed. The buyers are already on their way. We cannot show weakness. You will go down to the loading dock and you will oversee it personally. And you will pray that we find that woman and that book before she finds someone who will listen to her." Back at the saloon, Maria closed the book. "The sheriff's in their pocket. The whole town is too scared to help. It's just us." "Then it's just us," Rose said. Maria walked to a back room and returned with an old double-barreled shotgun. She broke it open, checked the chambers, and snapped it shut. "It's not much." "It'll have to be enough," Rose replied. "We're not going there to start a war. We're going there to free those people and get the proof out." "And what about Evan?" Maria asked, her eyes dark. Rose looked down at the book, at Silas's name implied on every page. "Evan is mine." They didn't use the stolen truck. It was too loud, too conspicuous. Maria led Rose out the back of the saloon to a dusty 10-year-old sedan parked in the alley. It was dented and unassuming, the perfect vehicle for moving unnoticed. Maria got behind the wheel, the shotgun resting on the passenger seat between them. Rose held Silas's book in her lap. "What's the plan?" Maria asked, her knuckles white on the steering wheel as she drove them through the dark back streets, avoiding the main roads where the sheriff would be patrolling. "You're the insurance," Rose said, her voice steady. She took out her own simple smartphone, a cheap model she used for emergencies. "Your phone, is it a smartphone?" Maria nodded. "Good. We're going to take a picture of every single page in this book, every name, every date. Then you're going to email those pictures to a reporter you trust, someone far away from here. If we don't make it, the story still gets out." It was a cold, pragmatic plan, born from a life where victory was never guaranteed. This was the growth forged in the fires of competition and loss. She was no longer just a fighter reacting to threats. She was a strategist, thinking 2 moves ahead. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the car was the quiet click of the phone's camera as Rose meticulously documented Silas's legacy. Maria drove, her eyes scanning the road, understanding the weight of her new role. She wasn't just backup. She was the failsafe. They parked the car a half-mile from the river, hidden in a grove of mesquite trees. The rest of the way was on foot. The old loading dock was a skeleton of a building. Corrugated metal walls rusted through, looming against the moonlit sky. The air was thick with the smell of river mud and decay. 2 large pickup trucks were parked near the main bay doors, their engines idling. Evan Monroe was pacing nervously, flanked by Cole, and 2 other men Rose didn't recognize. They were armed, their rifles held casually but ready. Rose and Maria watched from the cover of the overgrown riverbank. They could see the anxiety radiating from Evan. He was out of his element, a spoiled rancher's son playing at being a hardened criminal. He was a weak link. "There's 4 of them, plus whoever is driving the shipment truck," Maria whispered, clutching the shotgun. "I'll handle them," Rose said. "I need you to create a diversion. When I give the signal, I need you to make a lot of noise on the far side of the building. A gunshot, maybe, something to draw their attention. That's when I'll move on, Evan." "And the people in the truck?" Maria asked. "My first priority is getting them free," Rose stated, her jaw tight. "Evan is second." Before they could finalize the plan, headlights cut through the darkness. A large, windowless box truck, the kind used for hauling furniture, rumbled down the dirt path and backed up to the loading bay. The driver, a heavyset man, got out and spoke to Cole. Cole nodded and then barked an order. The back of the truck rolled up with a loud clang. Inside, huddled in the darkness, were at least a dozen people, men and women, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. They were herded out of the truck like cattle, blinking in the harsh glare of the truck's headlights. They looked confused, weak from their journey, their hopes of a new life about to be extinguished. Evan stepped forward, trying to project an authority he didn't feel. "Get them inside. The buyers will be here in 20 minutes. This was the moment. There was no more time for planning. Rose looked at Maria, her eyes filled with a cold fire. The years of discipline, the endless hours on the mat, the pain and the sacrifice of her past life. It had all led her here, to this dark riverbank in the middle of nowhere. She wasn't fighting for a medal or a title anymore. She was fighting for the names in Silas's book. She was fighting for the terrified faces staring out of that truck. She was fighting for the quiet dignity Evan Monroe had tried to beat out of her with a whip. She handed Maria her phone. "Send the email. Now. No matter what happens." Maria nodded, her fingers quickly tapping the screen. Rose pulled Silas's book from her jacket and tucked it safely into Maria's bag. The physical copy had to survive. She looked back at the scene. Cole was directing the captured people into the dark warehouse. Evan was standing by his truck watching, trying to look like he was in charge. He was isolated. He was the target. "Get ready," Rose whispered to Maria. She melted back into the shadows, moving with a predator's silence along the riverbank, circling towards the back of the warehouse. Every muscle in her body was coiled, ready. The fear was gone, replaced by an absolute chilling focus. This was her arena now. This was her fight, and she would not lose. The night held its breath. Rose was a statue in the darkness, her body a coiled spring of potential energy. She watched Cole shove the last of the terrified workers into the cavernous, dark warehouse. Evan stood by his truck, trying to look important, his silhouette illuminated by the headlights. Rose gave a slow, deliberate nod towards the opposite side of the clearing where Maria was hidden. It was the only signal she needed. A deafening boom shattered the night. It wasn't just a gunshot, it was the roar of Maria's double-barreled shotgun. The blast ripped through a stack of rusted oil drums, sending them clattering to the ground with a sound like a car crash. The diversion was loud, chaotic, and perfect. Instantly, the loading dock erupted into panicked confusion. "What was that?" one of the henchmen yelled, spinning around, rifle raised towards the noise. "Check it out! Now!" Cole barked, his professional calm cracking for a second. He shoved the last worker inside the warehouse and turned to face the threat, his own weapon at the ready. Evan yelped and dove behind the open door of his pickup truck, fumbling for the pistol in his waistband. He was a coward, just as Rose had predicted. As the two henchmen moved cautiously towards the sound of the crash, Rose exploded from the shadows. She didn't run across the open ground. She moved low and fast, using the abandoned box truck as cover. The driver of the truck, caught by surprise, was just turning from the cab when Rose reached him. He had no time to react. Her hand shot out, grabbing the front of his shirt as she drove her shoulder into his midsection. Using his momentum, she slammed him hard against the side of his own truck. His head hit the metal with a sickening thud, and he slid to the ground, unconscious. One down. Cole, hearing the scuffle, spun back around. "We've got company. Flank them," he shouted to the other men. But his men were already 50 yards away, moving deeper into the darkness to investigate Maria's diversion. They were separated. The plan was working. Cole raised his rifle, scanning the shadows around the box truck. He was disciplined, his movements calculated. He was the real threat. Inside the warehouse, the captured workers were screaming, their fear adding to the chaos. Rose knew she couldn't take Cole head-on while he had a rifle. She needed to get to Evan. She slipped around the back of the box truck, keeping the large vehicle between herself and Cole. From her new vantage point, she could see Evan still cowering behind his truck door, peering out into the darkness. She was about to make her move when a new sound cut through the night. A sound that made her blood run cold. Distant sirens, growing closer with terrifying speed. Sheriff Miller. Richard Monroe's cleanup crew was on its way. Her window of opportunity was closing fast. The sirens had the opposite effect on Evan. A wave of relief washed over his face. He stood up a little straighter, his fear replaced by a renewed arrogance. The law was coming to save him. "They're here!" Evan shouted to Cole. "The sheriff is here! Find her!" The approaching sirens forced Rose's hand. It was now or never. She burst from behind the box truck, sprinting across the 20 yards of open ground that separated her from Evan. Cole saw her. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt just behind her heels. He didn't fire again, afraid of hitting his boss. "Boss, get down!" Cole yelled. Evan fumbled with his pistol, his eyes wide as Rose closed the distance. He was a deer in the headlights, paralyzed by the sudden direct assault. He raised the gun, his hand shaking uncontrollably. Rose didn't slow down. She was 3 feet away when he finally pulled the trigger. The gun clicked. An empty chamber, or maybe the safety was on. In his panic, he hadn't checked. It was the last mistake he would get to make. She crashed into him, her momentum carrying them both to the ground. She ignored the gun, her focus entirely on controlling his body. Her legs immediately wrapped around his torso, trapping his arms. Her hands went for his neck, seeking a choke. Just then, 2 sets of headlights flooded the entire area, pinning them in a blinding white glare. The sheriff's car screeched to a halt, followed by a second patrol car. Doors flew open. "Freeze! County Sheriff!" Sheriff Miller's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Drop your weapon! Hands in the air!" Rose was on top of Evan, her hands locked on his collar. Cole had his rifle trained on her. The other 2 henchmen were running back from the woods, drawn by the sirens. Maria was hidden somewhere in the darkness. The trafficked people were trapped in the warehouse, and Sheriff Miller and his deputies were advancing, their guns pointed directly at her. The law had arrived, and it was on the wrong side. Pinned in the blinding headlights, Rose didn't flinch. She held Evan Monroe in a vice grip, his body her only shield. His pathetic, misfired gun lay useless in the dirt beside them. The air was a tense web of pointed guns, Cole's rifle, the sheriff's pistols, the deputies' shotguns, all aimed at her. "She's the one, Sheriff!" Evan screamed, his voice a pathetic mix of terror and triumph. "She killed Silas. She attacked me. Shoot her." "On the ground, Jackson. Let the man go," Sheriff Miller commanded, his voice amplified and distorted by the loudspeaker. He and his deputies advanced slowly, forming a semicircle. Rose ignored him. She tightened her grip on Evan's collar, pulling his head back. "This is a human trafficking ring, Sheriff," she yelled, her voice cutting through the night, clear and strong. And you're a part of it. These people are selling human beings. She's crazy, Evans shrieked. She's making it all up. Last warning, Jackson, Miller boomed. From the darkness on the far side of the warehouse, a loud metallic shriek echoed. It was the sound of a heavy chain being undone. With a groan of rusted metal, the massive rolling door of the warehouse began to slide open. Maria stood there, having used a crowbar to break the lock, the shotgun held at her side. One by one, the dozen captive workers stumbled out into the blinding glare of the patrol car headlights. They were gaunt, terrified, and undeniably real. They weren't a story. They were living, breathing proof. The scene froze. The advancing deputies stopped in their tracks, their eyes shifting from Rose to the crowd of frightened people. This wasn't the simple arrest of a dangerous fugitive they'd been told to expect. This was something else entirely. One of the younger deputies lowered his weapon slightly, his face a mask of confusion. "What the hell is this, Sheriff?" the deputy asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sheriff Miller's face hardened, his cover was blown. "Get them back inside!" he roared at Cole. Cole hesitated, his rifle still aimed at Rose, but his eyes darted towards the emerging witnesses. The situation was spiraling out of his control. In that split second of indecision, Rose acted. She wasn't going to kill Evan. That would be too easy. She wanted to break him. With a surge of strength, she shifted her weight, transitioning from a simple pin to a devastating submission hold. She hooked his arm, twisted her hips, and applied the same armbar she had used in the corral. But this time there was no mercy. This time there was no Silas to call her off. A wet, sickening crack echoed in the sudden silence. Evan Monroe let out a scream of pure, unadulterated agony. His arm was broken, bent at an angle it was never meant to take. He was no longer a threat, a boss, or a Monroe. He was just a whimpering man, writhing in the dirt, his power utterly shattered. Rose released him and stood up, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender, but her eyes blazed with victory. She stood over her defeated enemy, her posture radiating a power that had nothing to do with weapons. Cole, seeing his boss neutralized and the witnesses exposed, made a choice. He turned his rifle away from Rose and fired 2 shots into the air. "Everyone scatter! It's a bust!" He and the other 2 henchmen bolted for the darkness of the riverbank, abandoning the Monroes to their fate. Sheriff Miller was left standing in the headlights, his authority gone. His deputies were looking at him, then at the victims, then at the broken man on the ground. The simple narrative had collapsed, and he was standing in the ruins. Maria walked calmly out of the shadows, the shotgun held loosely in one hand and Silas's leather-bound book in the other. She stopped beside Rose. "It's over, Miller," Maria said, her voice ringing with the authority the sheriff had just lost. She held up the book. "This has every name, every date, and a reporter from the Houston Chronicle received a full copy 10 minutes ago. The story is already out. You can't bury this." Sheriff Miller looked at the book, then at his deputies, who were now looking at him with open suspicion. He slowly, deliberately lowered his pistol. The trap hadn't just been sprung on the Monroes, it had been sprung on him too. Rose hadn't just come for vengeance, she had come for justice, and in the harsh glare of the police headlights, she had gotten both. The standoff didn't last long. The younger deputy, seeing the undeniable truth in front of him, made a choice. He kept his gun trained on the sheriff. "Sheriff Miller," he said, his voice shaking but firm, "you're under arrest for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Put your weapon down, now." Miller, defeated, let his pistol clatter to the ground. The illusion of his power was gone, shattered in the glare of his own headlights. The other deputies followed the younger one's lead, securing their former boss and tending to the whimpering Evan Monroe. The rescued workers, cared for by Maria, were wrapped in emergency blankets from the patrol cars, their long nightmare finally over. By dawn, the old loading dock was swarming with state police and FBI agents. The Houston Chronicle story, fueled by the photos of Silas's book, had gone viral overnight. The news of a modern-day slavery ring run by one of Texas's most powerful ranching families was a national bombshell. The state authorities, forced into action by the public outcry, descended on Redemption County with a force the Monroes could not control. Richard Monroe was arrested in his leather and mahogany study. He was calm, composed, expecting to make a few calls and have this all smoothed over, but his calls went unanswered. His lawyers were met at the gate by federal agents with warrants. His political allies were already issuing statements, condemning him and feigning shock. His 40-year empire of fear and influence crumbled to dust in a single morning. As they led him away in handcuffs, his cold composure finally broke. He looked old, small, and pathetic. Evan's confession was a torrent of self-pitying excuses. In a desperate attempt to save himself, he gave up everyone: his father, Sheriff Miller, Cole, the buyers. He detailed the entire operation, from the recruitment of workers to the unmarked graves on the far side of the ranch. He confessed to shooting Silas, blaming Rose for provoking him. His testimony, combined with the evidence in Silas's book, was the final, undeniable proof. The town of Redemption breathed a collective sigh of relief. The cloud of fear that had hung over it for decades finally lifted. People started talking. Stories that had been whispered in secret were now spoken openly. More evidence came to light. More crimes were uncovered. The Monroe Ranch was seized by the federal government, its assets frozen. The rescued workers were taken to a safe location where they received medical care and legal aid. Their testimony would be crucial in the trials to come. A few weeks later, Rose stood on a small, quiet hill overlooking the vast Texas plains. She placed a final stone on a simple, newly carved headstone that read, "Silas Henderson, a good man who did the right thing." Maria came and stood beside her. "The new county supervisor wants to see you," she said. "They're rebuilding the sheriff's department from the ground up. They want someone to help with defensive tactics training, someone with a unique perspective on de-escalation." Rose looked at the endless horizon. For years, she had been running from a fight, seeking a quiet corner of the world to disappear into. But the fight had found her, and in facing it, she had found something better than peace. She had found purpose. She had come to this land as a cowgirl looking for a job. She had become the quiet guardian of a town that had forgotten how to fight for itself. "I'll think about it," Rose said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in a long time. She was no longer running, she was home. The arrogant rancher had picked a fight with the wrong cowgirl, and in doing so, he hadn't just lost his ranch or his freedom. He had liberated an entire community. Rose's vengeance wasn't just for her own humiliation. It was for every name in Silas's book, and for every person who would now live free from the shadow of the Monroe family. This story shows that one person's courage can ignite a fire that burns away decades of injustice. If you were inspired by Rose's fight, please help this story reach more people by liking and subscribing, and let us know you made it to the end by commenting, "I watched until the end." Now click the video on your screen for another story you won't want to miss. The trials were swift and brutal for the Monroe family. The combination of Silas's meticulous records, the testimony of the dozen rescued workers, and Evan's desperate self-serving confession created an ironclad case. Richard Monroe, defiant to the end, refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, his arrogance sealing his fate. He received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for human trafficking, conspiracy, and murder for hire. He would die in prison, a fallen king in a concrete kingdom. Evan, in a desperate, sniveling plea for a lighter sentence, testified against his own father. He detailed decades of cruelty and crime, painting himself as a victim of his father's domineering influence. The judge was unmoved. For the murder of Silas Henderson and his role in the trafficking ring, Evan was sentenced to 40 years. His broken arm, now held together by pins and plates, would be a permanent, aching reminder of the moment his life fell apart. The name Monroe became a curse in the county, a synonym for greed and evil. Former Sheriff Miller, exposed for his corruption, received a 15-year sentence, his legacy reduced to that of a crooked cop who sold his badge for a rich man's favor. The town of Redemption began to heal. The first symbolic act was the removal of the giant Monroe Cattle Company sign that had loomed over the town for half a century. In its place, a simple sign was erected: Redemption County Ranchlands. The federal government, as part of the asset seizure, established a trust fund with the Monroe fortune. It was named the Silas Henderson Justice Fund, created to provide financial support, legal aid, and a new start for the victims of the trafficking ring and their families. The Dusty Spur Saloon, once a place of whispered fears, became the town's unofficial community center. Maria, now a local hero, presided over a bar filled with laughter and open conversation. She never had to reach for her baseball bat again. The younger deputy who had stood up to Sheriff Miller was promoted to interim sheriff, his first act being to launch a full internal review of the department. Rose accepted the offer. The old horse barn at the edge of town was converted into a community center and gym. Twice a week, she held free self-defense and jiu-jitsu classes. Her students were a mix of everyone the Monroes had once terrorized. Young women who now walked with more confidence, former ranch hands who had been too afraid to speak up, and even the new sheriff's deputies who were required to attend. She taught them how to fall without breaking, how to use an attacker's weight against them, how to find leverage and control in situations that seemed hopeless. She wasn't just teaching them how to fight, she was teaching them how to be strong, how to stand their ground, how to never again let a bully with a whip, a badge, or a powerful name make them feel small. She still worked with horses, volunteering at a local rescue, but her true purpose was found on the mats in that barn. She had come to Texas seeking quiet solitude, a place to escape the ghosts of her competitive past. She had wanted to be left alone. Instead, she had found a community that needed a champion. She had learned that true strength wasn't about winning medals or escaping the world. It was about standing firm and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The crack of the whip had been an attempt to break her spirit, but it had only awakened the fighter she had tried to leave behind, and in doing so, it had saved them all. What began with the cruel crack of a whip in a dusty corral ended with the fall of a corrupt empire. The story of Rose Jackson is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the power you inherit, but the courage you choose to show when everything is on the line. One woman, pushed too far, refused to be broken. Her defiance became a spark, and that spark ignited a fire that burned away decades of fear and injustice, ultimately leading to the redemption of an entire town. It shows us that a single act of standing up for one's dignity can have a ripple effect that changes the world for countless others. This story isn't just about one hero, it's about the different forms courage can take. There is the courage of Rose, the direct, unwavering strength of a champion who meets a threat head-on. But there is also the courage of Silas, a quiet, patient resistance that gathers evidence in the shadows for years, waiting for the right moment, the right person to bring the truth to light. And there is the courage of Maria, the everyday person who sees injustice and finally makes the choice to stop being a bystander and become an ally. Without Silas's book and Maria's help, Rose's fight would have been a much lonelier and perhaps impossible battle. It took all of them to bring down the Monroes. The world is full of people like Evan and Richard Monroe, bullies who use their power, wealth, and influence to intimidate and exploit others. They count on our silence. They thrive on our fear. They believe their positions make them untouchable, but stories like this prove them wrong. They prove that integrity is more powerful than influence, and that justice, no matter how long it's been buried, can always be brought into the light by people brave enough to dig for it. Rose's journey, is a testament to the fact that you never know the hidden strength of the person you're trying to push down. If this story of courage, justice, and vengeance resonated with you, please help us share it with the world by giving this video a thumbs up. Every like tells the algorithm that these are the kinds of stories that matter, helping more people find our channel. And if you want to make sure you never miss another story of the powerless standing up to the powerful, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. We are committed to bringing you tales that inspire, that make you think, and that remind you of the enduring power of the human spirit. We have an incredible community of viewers who watch our stories from beginning to end, and we want to know that you're one of them. Show your support and let us know you completed Rose's incredible journey by going to the comment section right now and typing, "I watched until the end." Your support truly means the world to us. Thank you for being here with us today. The fight for what's right is a story that's always worth telling, and we have another one ready for you. Click on the video that is now appearing on your screen to continue with another unforgettable story of justice. We'll see you there.